Welcome to our Fox 32 special edition of Monument Moment. I'm Dane Placco. Perhaps you've heard the expression that journalism is the first draft of history. Most of our time here at the desk, we're talking about the news of the day. Politics, crime, current events, both good and bad. But it's also important to look back at Chicago's rich history, the people, places, and events that shaped our city and ourselves. Which is why we created our Monument Moment series, stories that offer a brief slice of local lore that's remembered with a monument, a statue, or historical marker. There are hundreds of them throughout the Chicago area. Some you know, others we had never heard of until you told us. Let's start our walk through history on Chicago's North Shore, where our Fox 32 drone team captured some fresh views of an old and spectacular lighthouse. Standing tall on a bluff over Lake Michigan, the Grosse Point Lighthouse in Evanston is a North Shore landmark. After a series of shipwrecks in the hazardous waters of Lake Michigan near Evanston, including the 1860 sinking of the Lady Elgin, which claimed nearly 300 lives, Congress appropriated $35,000 for construction of the lighthouse in 1870, and its lamp was first lit in 1874. The tower is anchored on wooden pilings and is made of Cream City brick encased in concrete, featuring two walls, each nearly 2 feet thick. It rises 119 feet with a 68,000 candle power light that can be seen by ships 21 miles out in the lake. The original Fresnel lens was built in Paris and remains the largest on the Great Lakes, underscoring the importance of this lighthouse. There's also a house that was used by the lightkeeper, his family, and assistants. The longest serving was Captain E.J. Moore, the lighthouse keeper for 36 years, from 1888 to 1924. In 1941, the U.S. Coast Guard decommissioned the lighthouse and turned it over to the city of Evanston, which continues to operate Grosse Point today under a special lighthouse park district. The grounds around the lighthouse are open to the public, and during the summer, limited tours inside the historic structure are offered on weekends. In 1999, the Grosse Point Lighthouse was designated a National Historic Landmark. In the late 1800s, Chicagoans of Polish descent began raising $30,000 for a monument to Polish Revolutionary War hero Thaddeus Kosciuszko. After arriving in America in 1776, Kosciuszko joined the Continental Army. A skilled engineer, he made significant contributions to the war by designing fortifications for several strategic locations such as Philadelphia, West Point, and Saratoga. In 1904, more than 50,000 Polish Americans gathered in Humboldt Park for the monument's dedication. In the mid-1970s, the Chicago Park District removed the statue when a nearby ball field was enlarged and relocated the monument to the newly renamed Solidarity Drive on Northerly Island. They also installed a time capsule beneath the sculpture, containing many documents relating to Polish history. In 2008, the time capsule was rediscovered during a roadway improvement project near the sculpture. The original items from the time capsule were conserved and additional items were added. Later, the time capsule was once again placed under the monument for posterity. One of the worst train disasters in U.S. history is remembered in two locations in the Chicago area. The Hammond Circus Train Wreck actually occurred in Gary, on these tracks still used today in the city's Ivanhoe neighborhood, a memorial marking the spot. In the early 1900s, the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus was the third largest in the country, featuring hundreds of acrobats, performers, animals, and crew that crisscrossed the country by rail. In the early morning hours of June 22, 1918, the 26-car circus train pulled onto a side rail to address a mechanical problem, leaving several cars still on the main track. Around 4 a.m., a locomotive pulling 20 empty Pullman cars used for transporting troops during World War I, its engineer sleeping at the throttle, slammed into the circus train at more than 35 miles an hour. Scores of sleeping circus workers were killed instantly by the violent crash. Moments later, fire caused by broken oil lamps on the circus train swept through the wreckage, burning to death dozens more who were trapped. Nearly 90 members of the circus died, and more than 120 were injured. 5 days later, 53 of those killed were buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in West Suburban Forest Park in a section called Showman's Rest. 1,000 mourners paid their respects. The mass grave is surrounded by statues of elephants in a pose of symbolic mourning. Most of the victims were so badly burned they could only be memorialized by gender and number. One grave marker reads, 4-horse driver. Another, Baldy. Today, a marker at the cemetery explains the history of the circus train wreck, which amazingly only forced the cancellation of a single performance. As the old circus saying goes, the show must go on. In the heart of Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood stands what is believed to be the country's only monument honoring African-American soldiers of World War I. The Victory Monument at 35th and King Drive was erected in 1927 and dedicated on Armistice Day 1928. After a long campaign for recognition by the Chicago Defender, the nation's most influential African-American newspaper. Made of bronze and granite and topped with the statue of an African-American doughboy, the monument is dedicated to the 8th Regiment of the Illinois National Guard, an all-black unit that fought in multiple campaigns in France during the Great War. The names of 137 8th Infantry members who lost their lives in World War I are inscribed on a bronze panel. In 1986, the Victory Monument was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and every Memorial Day, a ceremony is held here to remember the black soldiers who fought for freedom in Europe, when they themselves still weren't fully free at home. Coming up next, we take a look at Chicago's connection to Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers, as our Monument Moment special continues. You won't find any palm trees, but this leafy street in Chicago's Uptown neighborhood is the birthplace of Hollywood. This large red brick building was once home to S&A Studios, one of the first film production companies in the country. S&A was named after the initials of its founders, George Kirk Spoor and Gilbert M. Anderson, better known as Bronco Billy Anderson, the first star of the Western film genre. In 1907, they opened a studio in Old Town, and the following year built a much larger studio in the 1300 block of West Argyle, which still bears the name of the company. S&A may have been founded by a Western actor, but it was comedy that put it on the movie map. Its first star, the cross-eyed comic Ben Turpin, who found fame while working as a janitor at the studio. Turpin was known for extremely physical comedy, and in a 1909 film called Mr. Flip, got the first pie in the face in movie history. Many S&A films were shot outdoors in a lot next to the building or using the Chicago neighborhoods around the studio. In 1914, S&A signed its biggest star, Charlie Chaplin, who made 14 short comedies for the studio, but only one at its Chicago location. His new job was written and directed by Chaplin and shot in Chicago in January of 1915. Chaplin only lived in Chicago for a few weeks, and so hated the cold weather he moved to California to make the rest of his movies. After Chaplin left SNA, the studio foundered, closing in 1918 after producing more than 1,400 movies. Today, the building is part of St. Augustine College, which has worked to preserve its place in motion picture history. The old stage area is now used as an auditorium and conference room, a painting of Chaplin overlooking the room. Look up and you can see the ceiling scaffolding for movie lights still in place. And in the basement, a tour guide showed us the original film vaults are still here. A heavy steel door marked "Store Safety Film Only" leads to the room that once preserved and protected the extremely flammable nitrate film stock. Outside, there's another painting of Chaplin on a wall and a plaque designating the building as a Chicago landmark. A reminder that nearly 120 years ago, Chicago was instrumental in introducing a new art form to the world, the magic of the silver screen. At the southeast corner of LaSalle Street and Wacker Drive, a plaque on the south bank of the Chicago River marks the site of one of the world's worst ship disasters. The USS Eastland was moored just steps from dry land when it suddenly capsized the morning of July 24, 1915. Built in 1903, the Eastland was a steamship used for ferrying passengers on the Great Lakes. On that fateful day, more than 2,500 employees of the Western Electric Company in Cicero and their families had boarded the ship by 7 a.m. for a Saturday excursion to a company picnic in Michigan City, Indiana. At 7:28, the top-heavy Eastland suddenly rolled over to its port side while still tied to the dock, coming to a rest on the river bottom, just 20 feet below, only half the ship submerged. Passengers below decks were trapped inside as water filled the ship, others crushed by heavy furniture. Despite a fast and massive rescue response, 844 passengers and crew died, most within minutes. The bodies taken to a West Side armory for identification. 70% of the victims were under the age of 25. Later, the Eastland was sold to the Illinois Naval Reserve and recommissioned as the USS Wilmette, a gunboat used for training at the Great Lakes Naval Station, eventually scrapped in 1947. The marker commemorating the Eastland disaster was dedicated in 1989. Today, thousands of pedestrians and cars pass by on Wacker Drive every day, steps from the site of the most deadly shipwreck in Great Lakes history, a disaster that claimed more lives than the Chicago fire. In the middle of an industrial scrapyard on the banks of the Calumet River on Chicago's far southeast side sits a very tiny cemetery. So tiny, in fact, it has just one occupant, Andreas von Zergable, a one-armed veteran of the Battle of Waterloo. Von Zergable was born in Bavaria in 1797 and at the age of 18 fought with Prussian forces in the famous Battle of Waterloo. He lost his arm while helping defeat Napoleon's army. In 1854, von Zergable moved his large family to Chicago and, according to his descendants, purchased 44 acres of land near the mouth of the Calumet River for $160 in gold. He built a small shack on the property and began working as a fisherman, but died only a year after his arrival. Following his wishes, von Zergable was buried on his property, but the actual ownership of that land became the subject of a long legal battle in the late 1800s, the Illinois Supreme Court eventually ruling that the settler was in fact a squatter, but also ruling his remains could not be moved. Over the last 2 centuries, the marshy area filled in with industry, his grave passing from company to company, surrounded by growing smokestacks and power lines. An old wooden cross marking his resting place was replaced with a stone marker that was damaged in an industrial accident. In 1987, the Eastside Historical Society paid for a new marble gravestone surrounded by concrete blocks to protect it from industrial machinery. Today, in the 9300 block of South Ewing, employees of the scrapyard pull weeds and watch after the one-man cemetery, honoring the memory of a battle-scarred vet whose family battled to keep him here on the land they insist was his. This classic three-story brownstone on Chicago's South Side has a connection to one of the legendary comedy teams in movie history. For a number of years in the early 1900s, it was home to the Marx Brothers. Groucho, Chico, Harpo, Zeppo, and Gummo Marx were born and raised in New York. But as their stage careers blossomed, their mother, Minnie Marx, decided to move to Chicago, railroad capital of America, and centrally located to the vaudeville houses in which they performed around the country. In 1912, Minnie bought the home at 4512 South King Drive, then Grand Avenue, for $21,000. The neighborhood was largely populated by Jewish residents of German heritage. While the brothers were often traveling, Groucho later recalled spending afternoons watching baseball at nearby Comiskey Park. Initially a song and dance act, the Marx Brothers during their Chicago years evolved into a chaotic comedy troupe, developing the manic characters that later made them stars of the silver screen.
Who are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Who are you?
I'm fine too, but you can't come in unless you give the password.
In 1917, with World War I raging, Minnie Marx moved her family to Chicago's southwest suburbs, buying a farm on Route 66 south of LaGrange to raise chickens and vegetables. By producing food, she knew the Marx Brothers would be exempt from the draft. After the war ended, the family moved back to New York, where the Marx Brothers began a Broadway career that led to film. In 1998, the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs erected a marker in front of the Marx Brothers house to remember Chicago's role in nurturing one of the zaniest comedy teams in movie history. Up next, we take to the sky to look at an old missile site that protected Chicago during the Cold War, as our Monument Moment special continues. This Wolf Lake Nike Missile Monument, dedicated in 1999, sits less than 2 miles south of Nike Missile Site C-44. This site was part of the Chicago-Gary Defense Area, which included about 20 bases around Chicagoland. From 1958 to 1972, the Department of Defense deployed a group of surface-to-air missiles intended to shoot down any incoming nuclear missiles aimed at United States cities. This program, known as Project Nike, was the first operational American anti-aircraft system. In 1974, the missiles were decommissioned as the Cold War came to an end, but remnants of the sites remain all around the country to this day. A few, such as Site C-44 on Chicago's southeast side, can still be visited. Like a dinosaur from the industrial age, the bones of the Joliet Iron and Steel Works are preserved on a 52-acre site near the Des Plaines River and Illinois and Michigan Canal, and in the shadow of the old Joliet Prison. Once the second largest steel mill in the United States, the Iron Works opened in 1869. Producing 2,000 tons of pig iron every day and making many of the steel rails used in the expansion of the railroad system across the United States. At its height, the mill employed more than 4,000 workers, mostly immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. The working conditions were extremely tough and physically dangerous, with scalding heat from the 4 towering blast furnaces, toxic fumes, and falls from great heights. An uncounted number of workers died. A victim of the Depression, the ironworks closed in 1936, the blast furnaces going cold for the first time in decades. And for the next 60 years, what remained of the ironworks was slowly reclaimed by nature. But in the 1990s, the Will County Forest Preserve District began acquiring parcels of this crumbling site, adding paved trails and signs explaining its history. Like fossils poking out of the ground, the brick and concrete foundation tells the story of this once massive melting pot that earned Joliet the name City of Steel. Standing alone in an industrialized stretch of South Damon Avenue, this monument marks the spot where French missionary and explorer Father Jacques Marquette camped for a cold winter along the south branch of the Chicago River. The bronze plaque and stone decorative border feature Art Deco flourishes. It had once been mounted on a bridge crossing the river that was dedicated in 1930. After the bridge was replaced, the marker moved to its own spot just north of the new Damon Avenue Bridge, where today it stands by itself, surrounded by warehouses and factories. Father Marquette and his party spent the winter of 1674 into 1675 in a makeshift cabin built on the river's edge. After the spring thaw, the explorers were flooded out of their cabin and moved west along the Illinois River. The plaque shows the Jesuit priest meeting with a Native American member of the Illinois tribe. The inscription says Marquette's journal first brought to the world's attention the advantages of soil, climate, and transportation facilities in the Mississippi Valley and the Great Lakes Basin. Marquette suffered misfortune after he left this winter encampment. Months later, he died of dysentery along the shores of Lake Michigan while trying to return home. This area has seen numerous memorials to Marquette and his exploring partner, fur trader Louis Joliet, including a wooden cross erected in 1915, later removed for construction of the bridge. The Marquette Winter Monument, remembering a famous explorer's long, cold Chicago residence more than 350 years ago. The Chicago Portage stands at the west end of a 7.5-mile-long water and overland travel route across the Continental Divide, linking the St. Lawrence and Mississippi River systems. Well known to Native Americans, the route was first visited by Europeans, including explorers Marquette and Joliet more than 300 years ago. It became a major gateway for exploration and pioneer expansion to the west, and for the fur trade. This remaining protected portion of the Chicago Portage route has changed very little from the time numerous missionaries, soldiers, pioneers, voyagers, and traders passed through here. In 1821, the original portage route was mapped by John Wall. In 1848, the Illinois and Michigan Canal was opened, and in 1907, the Sanitary and Shipping Canal, which is still used today. The Chicago Portage was officially designated a National Historic Site by the Department of the Interior in 1952. It's one of only 2 National Historic Sites in the state of Illinois. Standing tall above the intersection of Ida B. Wells and Michigan Avenue and guarding an entrance to Grant Park since 1928 are 2 bronze sculptures of Native American warriors on horseback named the Bowman and the Spearman. Each statue stands 17 feet tall and rests on top of an 18-foot granite pedestal. Originally suggested by Daniel Burnham in his 1909 plan of Chicago, the statues are meant to symbolize both America's Indian heritage and the country's struggle for expansion. The sculptures were crafted in Croatia by sculptor Ivan Mestrovic and funded by a philanthropist who made millions in the lumber industry. The sculptor intentionally chose to not include each of the warriors' weapons. The spearman has no spear, and the bowman has no bow and arrow. The artist said he preferred they be left to the imagination, allowing the viewer to focus instead on their bodies, the angles, and the headdresses. In 2021, the George Floyd protests prompted a review of Chicago's controversial public monuments. In its final report, the Chicago Monuments Project noted criticism of the statues for their romanticized and reductive images of American Indians, but recommended keeping the bowman and the spearman at the entrance to Grant Park, citing their artistic and historic importance. Thanks for joining us on this time travel trip through Chicago history. We'd like to hear from you. If you know of any monuments, statues, or historical markers, especially the unusual or obscure, that you think deserve a fresh look, send us an email at monumentmoment@fox.com, and we'll hit the road and bring them to you.